What a shocker. An indie game dev that doesn't upload for months. Insert generic reason or apology here. And yes, for those who remember the indie game bingo card, I did indeed just get a bingo. What's my prize? You liking this video and subscribing. Hint hint. Now that we're done with all of that, let's get into the actual devlog. For those of you who don't know, I'm currently developing a game called Senseless, which is a story game where the player can manually control and switch between their different senses. Last time I showed you the dialogue system, but Senseless isn't just going to be a walking sim type of a story game. Instead, it's going to have puzzle, combat, and stealth mechanics to spice things up. And since my last devlog, I've made some headway on those features. But before we get into all of that, I need to address something far more fundamental to the game on a whole: the visual direction. To kick things off, I made a bunch of new models for the game, from shelves and stairs to turrets and a person, which I definitely didn't copy a tutorial to create, but we'll get into those later. So far I've stuck to a low poly toon shaded look, but as I've started to build out environments, especially large interior rooms, I've quickly realized that the lighting does not look very good. I tried switching over to Unity's high definition render pipeline for volumetric fog and lighting, but it obviously comes at a pretty big performance cost, which matters a great deal for this game since I want to be able to have it run in VR as well. If I can get the performance of the game in the place that I want, then I'll switch over to HDRP, but for now I think I'll stick with the universal render pipeline as I continue to build the game's mechanics. Speaking of performance, I've made some huge optimizations in the game's weather and saving systems. Previously, if I switched the weather while the game was running, my tweening library, DoTween, would freak out and start a new weather transition every frame. Of course, while this wasn't ideal, my Ryzen CPU could thankfully pretty much handle it. However, I had to be mindful of players playing on potato PCs, or perhaps just running an Intel CPU. I also finally conquered the game's saving and loading system, which has been haunting me since the beginning of the project. I now have a framework in place that should easily allow me to make multiple save files of the game and load them easily, as well as autosave important data. Now is the part of the video where I play chill music accompanied by some B-roll nature footage, to make it look like I'm an official game developer. Unfortunately, I didn't record any, so instead I'll show you this photo I took of a rather ominous sign I found. But it's out in nature, so close enough. Time for the features you've all been waiting for: enemies and combat. As you can see, I've added a turret enemy to the game, as well as the ability for the player to take and deal damage. I think it goes without saying that all these visuals and effects are temporary. I'm not at all happy with how the turrets currently look, and they're hardly animated. And the damage flash as well as the death explosion need some serious improvement. However, the proof of concept is complete. My original plan was to build a robust and modular enemy system that I could use to create a large variety of enemies for the game. But when I couldn't wrap my head around it, I decided instead just to make a turret enemy, to kind of give myself an idea of what I needed my enemies to do. This turret is quite simple. All it does is stay still and look ahead, but in the future I plan to have turrets that look around as well. If you walk into its field of view, it becomes alert and will try and shoot you until you leave its range. However, alert turrets will immediately start attacking you once you enter their range again. Right now the turrets are pretty dumb, and will only start attacking you if you literally walk directly in front of them. However, in the future I plan to have turrets and enemies that are able to hear the player as well. Just like the player can switch between their senses, I plan on having enemy types that can specialize in the different senses, such as smelling the player or hearing the player through walls, but being visually blind. I hope that enemies with similar abilities to the player will make for some interesting strategies and dynamics, if I can get it right of course. You might have noticed that the game has no health bar, so how is the player supposed to know when they're about to die? Well, they don't. Sorta. When the player takes damage, the screen gets darker and darker as they get lower on health, and if they haven't been damaged in a while, their health starts to slowly regenerate. The lack of a detailed health bar not only improves immersion, but it also increases the intensity of any fight, since the player doesn't know precisely how much damage they're taking or how close they are to death. However, this system may also be seen as frustrating or unfair, so the ever-closing in vignette provides a clue towards the player's health, and the forgiving regeneration allows the player to be reset every time they leave combat or briefly escape the line of fire. I might change the health system in the future if it's too frustrating or just not fun, but since this is a story game at its core, I didn't want the player to be hyper-focused on the health bar. But if you have any thoughts or suggestions, let me know in the comments. Another small change I made was to the game's UI. Now the game has a custom mouse cursor that spins based on how fast the mouse is moving, which I think adds a nice visual touch. I also started adding smooth animations to the pause menu. However, I obviously still plan on overhauling the UI down the line. At the beginning of this devlog, I talked about a character model that I made by following a tutorial. The purpose of this model is to act as a silhouette of a person for things like these pods. This is a good time for me to let you know that the different locations you've seen in the background of this devlog won't be in the final game. They are just testing rooms or concept pieces for actual locations, like the server room. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the progress I've made over these last few months, especially considering that I've hardly put any development time into the game. Going forward, I plan on spacing out my devlogs a bit more, aiming for quality over quantity, but I also hope to release some other videos as well. For example, I'm feeling an itch to do a game jam since I missed out on the GMTK jam. Of course, my desire to do such a game jam comes purely from the love of jams and has nothing to do with the fact that they're my best performing videos. With that said, devlog over. Peace out.